My name is Mike. By day, I'm a tech lead at the account security team at Google, and sometimes in my spare time, I work on Bitcoin as well. So I'm one of the Bitcoin developers, and I've been involved with Bitcoin since around April of 2009, back when it was basically just me and Satoshi, and I left for a bit and came back. So today, I'm going to talk to you about the future of Bitcoin, and I'm not talking about the short-term future, I'm talking about the long-term future, the next 5, 10 years. If you want to know about the next 6 or 12 months, there's a talk tomorrow by Peter Will and also Jeff Garzik, and they will tell you about what's happening right now. But I want to explore the long-term future because it's important that we build the case for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Today, there's an idea, there's this meme that things like Bitcoin are useful only for buying drugs, or maybe just as a cheaper way of doing what you can do with credit cards. And it's actually possible to do a lot more than that. So, typically what I'm going to tell you about today is contracts. Now, these ideas aren't totally new. This quote is from Satoshi in 2010. And he said, "The design supports a tremendous variety of possible transaction types that I designed years ago. Escrow transactions, bonded contracts, third-party arbitration, multi-party signature, and so on. If Bitcoin catches on in a big way, these things we'll want to explore in future, but they all had to be designed at the beginning to make sure they'd be possible later." Many people don't understand that Bitcoin system, the protocol and software, is full of features which lie dormant. They are not used today. And when I was re-implementing Bitcoin in Java a few years ago, I came across these features and I asked Satoshi, what are they for? And he responded by giving me some basic training in the design of what he calls contracts. And then he vanished. So the rest I had to figure out, we had to figure it out ourselves. But I think you'll agree that relative to the state of Bitcoin in early 2010, it has caught on in a big way. And that means now is the time to explore these ideas. So there's a lot to get through, so I'm going to move quickly. Hands up here if you would say you're somewhat familiar with Bitcoin, how it works. Oh, most. Okay, that's good. So this is not going to be a very technical talk, but I want to state now that everything in this talk is implementable today by anyone who is a capable programmer. This is not a talk full of wishes or wouldn't it be great if. It's a talk full of things that we know exactly how to implement the blueprints on the wiki if you want to go ahead and do it. Micropayments, it's a hello world of Bitcoin apps. This is where I discovered that OpenOffice has chosen weird fonts for me. Okay, no problem. So, micropayments. This is like the basics of the hello world of advanced payments. Bitcoin transactions are really cheap, but they are not completely free, right? Whenever you make a Bitcoin payment, you have to broadcast a message to the entire network, and everyone taking part in the Bitcoin system has to do some calculations and verify it. What that means is Bitcoin is full of defenses that stop people flooding the network with lots and lots of tiny payments. Now, you can make a tiny payment to someone like once, right? But then you have to wait a little bit until you can do it again. And this isn't always what you want. Typically, good uses for micropayments involve repeated billing for like a very metered service. And you can't really do that with Bitcoin today. Or can you? Actually, you can. But it's a bit of a weird solution. You use something called a micropayment channel. And this means that you choose who you're going to interact with, the payer and the payee, and you broadcast a transaction that sets up a certain amount of value, and it can be quite large, let's say, $100 or something. And then you negotiate another set of transactions which don't have to be broadcast, and those transactions decide how much of that 100 Bitcoins each party gets. So some of it comes back to you, and some of it goes to them, and you can update this transaction hundreds of times per second, right? You can actually pay, increment little payments in very small quantities. For example, if you think about, many of us here have come to London from other countries, we are surrounded everywhere we walk in the city by high-quality, high-speed internet connectivity we cannot use because it is a Wi-Fi hotspot that is locked. And these hotspots are locked for two reasons. One is accountability. People don't want people downloading, illegal materials and other things through their IP address because then they'll get blamed for it. And the other problem is billing, like why should I give my internet connection to you for free? And the result is that we have to use our mobile carriers who then charge us an arm and a leg. Now, solving accountability is pretty easy. You can just have the hotspot say, I'll only relay encrypted traffic to one destination, right? So you effectively have to set up a VPN connection through them. And then they say, well, it's all encrypted. I don't know what's going on. It's not my problem, right? Someone else takes responsibility for this traffic. And then billing, we can do this with a Bitcoin micropayment. So what this means is if you have a Wi-Fi hotspot running this software, then you can solve all of this, and you just run it, and it can be open to anyone, and it can be so open that your phone can just roam onto it with no interaction at all. He doesn't have to ask you anything. It just connects to this hotspot, starts paying for it. The hotspot can't scam you because of the Bitcoin protocol, right? You don't have to worry about connecting to a node that's going to rip you off. The worst case, you lose maybe a fraction of a cent. It's not a problem. Dispute mediation. A big problem we have today in Bitcoin is there's no chargebacks. That is a strength. It is a big strength, as we heard from Tony yesterday, but it is also a weakness because it means if a transaction goes wrong, you have no recourse. The merchant has your money and you have nothing, right? Now, you can solve this very easily today with no technology at all. You just find someone you trust and you send them the money and you say, please act as a dispute mediator for us. But it is very difficult to trust someone to hold large sums of money, even if they're really great guys. And I want to reinforce at this point that when I talk about trusting people, I'm not talking about, are they a nice guy or are they a bit of a scammer, right? You can be an incredibly nice person, well-meaning, lovely person, and then you get hacked and your reputation changes immediately because you've effectively your behavior is no longer what it should be. So you've got to trust a third party to not only hold large sums of money and not steal it, but also to not get hacked. And this is very hard, right? You want specialist dispute mediators, people who, if you buy a Stradivarius violin, they're going to be a specialist in violins and they can tell the difference between, oh, I received a regular violin or I received a classic, expensive one. But you don't want to trust them to be computer security experts as well. Bitcoin has N of M transactions. It allows you to send money to 3 people, and 2 of them have to agree. And in fact, 2 and 3 here are variables. You can set them to whatever you want. So, for example, I can send some money to an output that says, I need to agree, and the merchant needs to agree, or to an output that has me, the merchant, and a dispute mediator. Right? So if there's no dispute, then me and the merchant agree, and the merchant gets the money. But if there is a dispute, and the violin isn't really a Stradivarius violin, it's a fake, then the mediator and I agree and I get the money. Or the mediator and the merchant agree and the merchant gets the money. But at no point can the mediator ever steal the money. Right? They can decide who gets it, but they can't actually take it for themselves. So this means that it's much easier to become a mediator and you can have real specialist and really good forms of dispute mediation. Now, that's great, but we're still talking about people. And often, the most interesting things you can do with Bitcoin come when you don't take existing use cases and re-implement them, but you scale things down. So you say, okay, we've got this automated system that's really efficient. What happens now if we take it to the next level, right? Take people out of the equation completely. So an oracle is a program that runs other programs and then decides what kind of transaction to sign based on the output. So if the dispute, you can think of it as a dispute, if the condition on which you wish to control payment is testable by a program, then you can actually just remove people entirely, and this has a couple of advantages. One is it's cheaper, of course. And another is that it's actually possible through the Oracle protocols to repeatedly check that this program is going to behave and do what you expect without actually having to send money. Okay, so here's an example. An old man has got a lot of money and he wants to give his grandson an inheritance, either on the grandson's 18th birthday or when the man dies, whichever comes first. Now, the 18th birthday condition is very easy because Bitcoin has a feature called lock times. You can create a transaction that sends money that doesn't become valid until a certain time, right? So you set the lock time to the son's 18th birthday, give him the transaction on a USB stick, whatever, and that's done. But the condition that he gets the money if you die, that's hard, right? Bitcoin miners have no concept of who's alive and who's dead. What you can do instead is, for example, if you live in a place where the certificate of death registers is online, like the state of Missouri, for example, you can write a program that just checks this database, and then if the man has really died, it can say to the Oracle, please sign for this transaction and release the money. Another example, maybe you want to buy insurance in case your website gets hacked. The program can go and search Google, and if the malware warning appears, then it knows the site's been hacked. This is a useful thing because you can't really fake it, right? If your website is being appeared as blacklisted on Google, it's also been blacklisted in Firefox and Chrome and Safari, and that means you really don't want to try and do insurance fraud. It's really difficult to do that. Bets as well, if you want to release money depending on the certain value of an exchange rate or whether something happened, because these programs can do anything on the internet, right? Maybe you want to do a bet on a sports event, or you want to bet on someone doing an amazing thing. You can express that bet as a search over news articles, right? You could do a search on Google News, and if certain combinations of phrases appear, the bet has been successfully completed, right? So a lot of things can actually be done in an automated way. And the advantage, because you can submit bogus challenges to an oracle, there's no danger that the guy who runs this program turns around and says, hey, that's a really huge amount of money you want to release, why don't you cut me in? Which is a danger whenever you have a lot of money at play. Someone might turn around and say, I'm not going to release the money unless you cut me in. But you can challenge an oracle over and over again with bogus, non-existing transactions, so they can't do that. They don't know which is fake and which is real. Okay, moving on. An assurance contract. Hands up if you've heard of Kickstarter. Everyone has heard of Kickstarter. Awesome. And Kickstarter never uses the term on their website, but what they implement is known in the economics literature as an assurance contract. This is a thing where an entrepreneur says, I will do a certain thing if I raise 1,000 Bitcoins. And people make pledges. They say, I pledge 100, I pledge 10, I pledge 20. But the money never leaves their wallet until the actual target is reached. So if the guy only raises 800 Bitcoins or $800 worth of money, he never reaches the target, then no one pays anything at all. Right, so we can implement this in Bitcoin without any third parties, but if you want to do this with credit cards, it's hard, right? Kickstarter implement this for you, but of course they charge fees. They add a lot of value as well. But with Bitcoin, what you can do is implement this yourself. You just have a server running at home. It uses, again, a presently unused feature of the Bitcoin protocol that only people who have re-implemented it really know about. This is sick hash anyone can pay, and it allows you to create a Bitcoin transaction, a payment effectively, which is not valid. It attempts to send more money than it receives, and that breaks the rules of Bitcoin. You're not allowed to create money out of nothing unless you're a miner in Bitcoin. But what you can do is give someone this invalid transaction in such a way that they can collect these invalid transactions, they can collect these payments, and then merge them all together at the end. And once they've imported enough money, once they've combined enough pledges, the payment does become valid. And then they can broadcast it, and the money leaves your wallet at that point. But it's cryptographically impossible. The miners won't accept it if they don't get enough pledges. And of course, you can combine this with dispute mediation. So if you want to pledge to something, but you're not sure if the person will actually build it or not, then you can take into account automatic or manual dispute mediation and merge all of these ideas together. Often the most exciting examples of Bitcoin come in, again, you've got to think, how can we re-implement what already exists, but what happens when we scale down, okay? Think about all the people in the world who don't speak good English. Most of the web is English. So this is a problem for them when they're using the internet. Now, Google provides an auto-translate service. It gets better every year. It works a lot better for some languages than others. It works well for German. It works poorly for Turkish, for example. Imagine that people have a browser extension with a little wallet. They send a little bit of Bitcoins, and there's a peer-to-peer network. And as they browse the web, every time they encounter a web page which is not written in their language, it broadcasts a pledge. And the pledge says, I pledge a bit of money towards the translation of this web page. And of course, once the page is translated, it's available to anyone. This is a public good. And then, if enough people all land on the web page at the same time, right, maybe it went viral on a social network, maybe it's in the news, then all of those pledges get merged together by whoever happens to gather enough of them first, broadcast on the network, the payment to a translator is locked in, they can then start and you would actually be able to see it be translated right in front of you as you're looking at the web page. This is a very sort of simple example of how you can use really cheap, low-cost assurance contracts. You're creating new contracts multiple times per second, which you can't do with something like Kickstarter. But it works, because Bitcoin is a very efficient system. All right, I just need a drink, sorry. Smart property is property, physical property, that is cryptographically controlled by the blockchain. How many of you here have sold things, physical things, for PayPal, or with PayPal? Yeah, so some. Hands up again if you didn't know the person you were selling to. Okay, you must never do this, right? It's safe if you send the thing by post. It is not safe if someone comes and picks it up in person, and there's a whole industry of scammers who exploit people who don't know that. Right? It's not safe because PayPal has a very simple dispute mediation policy. They say if you can provide proof of postage, the seller wins. Any other situation at all, the buyer wins. And what this means is, even though it's the most basic kind of trade imaginable, if someone, you can't actually sell something physically with PayPal, which is, of course, the most common form of electronic payment. My own brother had his laptop stolen from him in this way, or one of his old laptops. The scammer said, there was some guy on some forum was like, yeah, I'll buy your laptop off you. The payment went through a few hours before, the guy turned up, took the laptop away, and of course, a few hours later, the payment was reversed, and there's nothing you can do. The money was stolen. Now, smart property reduces trust that you need for this kind of transaction. It's possible for anything which is controlled cryptographically. Examples, smartphones, cars. If you're in a car, it probably comes with an immobilizer. When you put a bit of metal into the lock, the metal itself is not what is starting the car, right? The engine actually has a radio in it, and it handshakes cryptographically with a chip in the key itself, and that is what starts the car. And it's actually the lock controlling your car is cryptographic. Some of you might work in offices in which the doors are controlled by smart cards, for example. I work in one of these to open locks at Google offices. You hold up your card to the reader, and then it lets you through. Again, the whole thing is powered by cryptography. The keys are usually embedded in something physical, and you can't do anything with them more than that, which is a waste. What we can do is teach these systems, and it's just a software upgrade, so it's easy to do, how to understand the Bitcoin protocol, or a subset of it. And then you can imagine we could do a safe as well. Shell accounts on remote computers, they don't really have to be physical. The idea here is the same Bitcoin transaction, the same message understood by the Bitcoin network, which moves the money, acts as a proof of ownership to the new proof of ownership to the device. So this message, which sends money, it also contains extra data that Bitcoin ignores, but it's ignored, but it's mined upon. It's still taken into account in the proof of work. But the device itself understands this data. And this means the payment and changing of ownership is atomic. Programmers call something atomic if it can't be split up, right? Now it's safe. What I can do is I can sell my car, and then we do it with our phones. We touch our phones together. I send you the money, and the very act of sending money means the other person gets a proof of payment, almost like a receipt, that they can then touch to the car's dashboard, proves to the car it has a new owner, the guy drives away. There's no chance for fraud. Now, this is all well and good, but you may have noticed that the talk was not only about applications of Bitcoin, like interesting things we can do with Bitcoin, but it was also, I promised to discuss how we can rebuild the financial system. And to me, that means banking but no banks. Right? Can we build a society that looks like the society we have today but is entirely free of banks? There's nothing wrong with banks. Okay. People like that idea. The people who work at banks, they're usually good people. They're trying hard in many cases, but they have privileged positions, and they're often abused to do things we would not agree with. And in general, it would just be better if we didn't need them. Now, maybe you're thinking smart property seems kind of a bit like a solution searching for a problem. Maybe you don't sell things for PayPal in person all that often. But we can take it to the next level. Smart property can be used as collateral in loans. And the way this works is you do a sale, and it's a minor extension of the same protocols. The lender and the borrower construct transactions that the car understands, same as before. And I'm using it as a car as an example here, right? It could be many other things you can imagine. And what happens here is effectively the borrower sells the car to the lender, but the act of selling it also establishes a temporary time-limited access key, which can be in your phone or in some other device. So you can still start the car and drive it around, say, for the next 90 days. But after 90 days, the key expires and ownership is now completely owned by the lender, right? So the borrower defaults, the car automatically changes ownership to the lender, the guy can no longer drive it around. So unfortunately, the font size changed. But there's a neat thing here, which is also that the lender doesn't really have to trust the borrower, right? The lender can cryptographically prove to themselves that the car really exists, it's the car that the guy says it is, and so on. But the neat thing is, the borrower also doesn't have to trust the lender, because when they set up this transaction, the loan, the lender can also give the borrower back a Bitcoin transaction, which, just like an assurance contract, isn't valid yet. It's not valid until enough payments are added to it to make it valid. And what that means is that the borrower can add repayments to this transaction until eventually they've paid back the size of the loan. And once they've done that, they can broadcast that transaction and get the proof of new ownership that they need to the car. Even if the borrower vanishes a day after making the loan, even if the lender vanishes a day after making the loan, the borrower has no problem. He can still get his property back by repaying the loan. The whole thing is mediated by Bitcoin miners. Now, you might wonder, if I'm in the UK and suddenly I end up with a car in America that I own because the borrower defaulted on their debt, that's useless to me. Well, no, because I can use the same smart property protocols in the previous slide to sell the car to someone I don't know who is on the other side of the world. They come along and they pick it up, and now I've got the money from selling the asset, right? That's the point of collateral. Now, implementing this today, it's a little difficult unless you happen to be a car manufacturer or a smartphone manufacturer and so on, because the hardware needs to be secure, right? You have to be able to trust the borrower can't hack the car and change the rules of the system. And cars, phones, they do have secure hardware. but it means secure against the user, right? So you can't actually upgrade or reflash the OS on these systems. It needs to be built in by the manufacturer. So this is a concept that is at best 10 years out, I would say. Who knows, maybe it'll never happen, but it's theoretically possible. Okay, so we've got collateralized lending, that's good, it's a good start. In real world, we need uncollateralized lending as well. Big loans can't be easily secured, even with things like houses, right? You get to the point where it's just not possible to secure them. A bond is a securitized loan. That means it's like a thing, right? It's like a portable asset you can buy and sell, and whoever the current owner of the bond is gets the repayments. Now, bonds can also be modeled as smart property, right? And it's possible you can build an application, just like regular Bitcoin is today, that you download to your computer, and it scans the blockchain, and it builds a peer-to-peer bond market. It's got a separate peer-to-peer network, but it also interacts with the Bitcoin network. And it downloads all this data, and now you can see every bond on the market, the payments yielded, whether they're in default or not, and so on, right? And when you've got uncollateralized lending, right, all you've got is the creditworthiness of the issuer to know whether you're going to get the money back or not. So you can go to organizations like Mt. Gox who are already doing identity verification, and they can issue certificates saying this is really their name, and they prove their identity with the passport and the utility bill and so on. And you can see, like, in the market who is issuing what kind of debt and what their credit rating is. Maybe their credit rating comes from a third party, like Experian, or maybe the credit rating comes from the track record they have paying off bonds, which of course can be calculated by the application as well. And all of this is mathematically provable, right? It can't be forged. You have to be careful that people don't build up a fake credit rating by lending money to themselves. So you have to have some trust in the identity verification procedures, but beyond that, you don't need any trust. Now, lending is a very important thing. Banks lend. If you can't do lending, you can't have a replacement for banks. But most of us are not investing in specific assets like bonds or stocks. Oh yeah, actually, there was a bullet point that fell off the bottom here, so I forgot to say it. But you can actually do a stock market in the same way, in case you're wondering. So most of us actually put money into investment funds. You might not even realize it, but people who are putting money into pensions, that's obviously a fund. If you've just got money in a bank account, in a place like the UK, effectively your bank account is a fund, right? That money gets invested and it pays interest. A fund is a fundamental abstraction in finance, you might say. It's a policy, right? You say, like, I want to put my money into low-risk things, like local business bonds of short-term maturity, or you say, I want to put my money into high-risk things, like energy stocks, or really high-risk things, like hedge funds that don't even tell you what they're going to do. They just say, trust us, we're really good and we're going to make you a lot of money. But when you know what kind of policy you want, we can implement this in a peer-to-peer way as well. And this relies on something called high-water ciphertext policy attribute-based encryption. It's a bit of a mouthful. The mathematics is quite advanced, and I don't have time to go into it here. But effectively, it allows you to send money not from person to person, like with Bitcoin today, from key to key, but you can send money to a policy, and anyone who matches that policy can unlock the money and claim it. And the policy is a Boolean formula over attributes. Range queries are supported, for those of you who are curious about the technical details. And basically, to unlock this stuff, you go around to a bunch of different issuing authorities and say, you know, here I am, this is what I am, this is a state of the world, and they give you keys encoding these attributes. You can merge together all those keys. When you have a key with the right attributes, you can then go and take any money which is sent to those attributes in the blockchain. Right? So again, you download an app, you run it on your desktop, just like Bitcoin today, and it can show you all of the investments that are out there. Like people are saying, I want to put my money into this kind of business or that kind of business. And you can even see the demand. So as an entrepreneur, you know what money is available, and you just have to go out and actually go through credit checks and identity verification and so on, so you can take that money and people trust that you're going to actually do what you say you will. As an example of a policy, to make this concrete, you could say the claimer must have a good credit rating, and you can specify thresholds using these formulas. So you can say 2 of these 3, right? You must be issuing a mining bond, and it must have an interest rate between X and Y, and it must mature within these many months, and so on, right? So you can encode sort of arbitrary policies in this way such that anyone can claim them. And in this way, you can effectively create your own investment fund, or of course you can reuse templates from other people if they're willing to share what their policies are. Okay, there's one more thing we need to have a completely peer-to-peer financial system, and I've got 3 minutes. So it's a good thing this is the last one. Currency exchanges are currently very centralized. Mt. Gox has around 90% of the market. They deserve it. They're a good company. They're very competent, very good at what they do. I don't know if Mark is here, but I've used his service and I have a lot of confidence in him. Nevertheless, it is a fact that centralized exchanges that interface with the banking system are vulnerable to being arbitrarily shut down, suspended. Mt. Gox had problems repeatedly with banks in France suspending them, even though French law says you must have a bank account, right? And under French law, they're not allowed to kick you out of the banking system, but it happened anyway. Now, if we could create a completely peer-to-peer currency exchange, we wouldn't have these problems. Or we could just do currency exchange amongst each other, and there would be no central institution that can be like smacked on the head. Right? We can do this using the Ripple concept from Ryan Fugger, and this is a fairly straightforward concept. You start with a social graph of people who know each other, right? So, for example, I know Alice, and Alice knows Bob. And we start with a merge mined alternative chain which tracks credit relationships. So people who know you provide credit lines. And then, for example, I can say, I know Alice, she's pretty cool, she's got a good stable job. Maybe I'm willing to lend her $1,000, right? And then Alice knows Bob, and she's like, well, I like Bob, but honestly, he's unemployed, he's kind of a shady guy. Maybe I give him a credit line of $100. Now, I don't know Bob, right? But I do have some Bitcoins that I want to sell, and Bob would like to buy some Bitcoins. So I can publish the fact that I want to sell on this peer-to-peer network. And then the software, which is downloaded basically everyone's credit relationships. And again, this is Bitcoin style, it's anonymized, right? You don't actually get to know everyone's names and so on, but you can see the nodes on the nodes and edges in the social graph. And Bob says, I would like to buy. And his software goes off and it does a bunch of calculations, right? It does an A-star search over the graph, and then it says, oh, I know Alice, and Alice knows Mike, so I can buy $100 worth of Bitcoins from Mike. And the money just leaves my account, right? The Bitcoins leave my account and sail off into the wilderness. And then my software says, Alice now owes you $100 of that $1,000 of the credit line that you opened up. And Alice's software says, Bob owes you $100 as well, right? So now Alice and Bob settle up however they want, with cash, with PayPal, bank wire, buying rounds of beer, it can be anything. And Alice and Bob settle up, and then next time I meet Alice, I'm like, hey, Alice, my software says you owe me $100. And she's like, yeah, no problem, here you go. And we have now cleared effectively cleared the transfer, but it was a peer-to-peer, hop-to-hop transfer instead of using the banking system. And the result is that we can now build effectively a peer-to-peer coin money market. Just with software, you don't need any other infrastructure. So, we've covered a lot of ground. I hope you followed it all. I hope you agree with me also that Bitcoin's future is really bright, and that the applications we can build with this protocol are far beyond what we're currently doing. As far as I know, nobody's really working on any of these ideas. Jeff said he was going to look at the bond market one, but I don't know if it's going to happen because we're all pretty busy just making Bitcoin scale and not fall apart. But I'm sure some of these ideas will get implemented at some point. 28 minutes. That's the end of my talk. Thanks very much for listening. And time for questions.